Hey guys, Akio Murasaki here. Today I have a bit of a different topic, like really different, not related to anime, not related to manga, not related to anything, well almost anything Japan or Japanese pop culture related, but nevertheless a very important topic as it has to deal with how we are going to be acquiring and processing information in the very near future. So if you've guys heard, there is a new competitor to Wikipedia on the block. Its name is Grokipedia from Elon Musk's XAI's Grok, and it's currently in version 0.1, and it's already been making headlines in mainstream news. It's actually shocking to me how quickly mainstream news and a lot of different outlets online have picked up the story and are already, keyboard warriors. They're basically spawning and spamming articles left and right and posting social media. That Grokipedia has been making quite a bit of rounds. And I did have a look at some of the posts people put out here on Twitter and some of the articles from the initial version of Grokipedia. But before I go into this, I kind of want to cover how, Wired here in this case is talking about Grokipedia and whether, I'm not going to go for the entire article, I will just briefly summarize it. What is the overall kind of like mainstream media reaction to it? So we have Wired here with Elon Musk's Grokipedia pushes far-right talking points. Far-right talking points, yes. I think you guys have been hearing about far-right this, far-right that. Working out is far-right. Exercising and being healthy is a white male privilege. It's a far-right thing, as apparently I think there's like an article from The Guardian at some point. So a lot of things have been far-right in recent years. Now apparently Elon Musk's Grokipedia is also pushing far-right talking points. When you keep hearing people being called Nazis, people being called fascists, something being called far-right, my expectations immediately drop to the bottom, to ground level, and perhaps even below sometimes. And especially when this is phrased like this. So we have a sentence: the new AI-powered Wikipedia competitor falsely claims that pornography worsened the AIDS epidemic and that social media may be fueling a rise in transgender people. Notice the first one is falsely claims. So the writer of the article already assumes that there's absolutely no validity in the claims whatsoever. And yet Grokipedia is based on Grok, the main AI model from XAI. And yes, you can probably imagine an AI model can hallucinate, can generate new information, but it also takes the information from somewhere. It aggregates information from different sources. And many of the models nowadays, like ChatGPT for instance, they are able to make a bit of a value judgment when it comes to the quality of the information. It's not perfect, obviously, but there is some kind of like human-like value judgment that the models can make already to decide on the veracity of the information. So if it's including that kind of claim, perhaps there is some data to it. Maybe there's a link you can then have a look at some source that possibly backs this up. Of course, this is version 0.1 so far, so without any glazing, it's obviously not going to be perfect. It's going to have a lot of errors. And then we have the second point: social media may be fueling a rise in transgender people. That is a very interesting perspective. I personally don't have any data on hand which would confirm or deny that claim, but it's an interesting one. If there are some sources, you can go look them up from Grokipedia and learn a few things. But in general, this article is, as you would expect from, I would say, what you can kind of say mainstream media. Wired really isn't, but it's been dealing with a lot of things in the recent years, and the quality of writing in Wired has in general been dropping. But that is not the point I'm trying to make here. What I'm trying to say is that this article is incredibly biased. They do mention things like, for instance, Wired was initially unable to access the website and received an automated message that it was blocked. So the article is kind of filled with a lot of these kind of like, wink, wink, honk, honk talking points where they are suggesting that their access to information was somehow limited and there is bias against Wire. But there's something I want to say about the shaping of mainstream media in the last couple of years. Has it always been truthful? No. When I think in the 1980s or so, mainstream media, a lot of different media outlets, when it comes to TV or written media like newspapers, there's always been a bit of a bias when it comes to the English-speaking sphere. There's been a lot of kind of like emotional language. There's been kind of, prodding and direction in how different pieces of information are being sold. I don't think there was specifically something like a left-wing, right-wing bias, but there was a bias for specific outlets, whether a small piece of information is supposed to sound or not more dramatic. All of this obviously flies against, Journalism 101 and journalism ethics, but yet here we are. In the recent years, that has gotten only worse, to the point that when you watch some of the stuff from CNN, for instance, or NBC, you'll notice a very clear bias. You will notice a lot of unusual language that is being used when doing reporting, like kind of misrepresenting information. That is very common nowadays. So is it also true, for instance, that places like, Fox News, that always had a bad reputation among the more liberal and the more reasonable people, but you can also think like, okay, if Fox News always had their reputation I had when I was younger, and like 30 years ago or so, I had way more trust towards CNN, I would say. Nowadays, most of this trust is gone because you can straight away see the very, very biased reporting and misuse of language that is being done in order to push a specific perspective. So we no longer are talking about reporting news, we're talking about pushing a specific perspective. And so Wire kind of peaks by already labeling Grokipedia as pushing far-right talking points, saying that something far-right is a great way to instantly label something negative, something bad and untrustworthy, as we've seen in recent years. I don't think we should be treating this seriously. We should be treating individual pieces of information on a claim-by-claim basis, and that's where I want to kind of go here. I'm gonna skip the other. Well, I'm maybe gonna mention a little bit here how currently Wikipedia thinks about Grokipedia. We have this highlighted here. Articles have been described as manipulated to promote right-wing perspectives and Elon Musk's views. That's pretty hilarious. Medical misinformation and for removing content disfavored by Musk. I will do at the very end, I will kind of mention where Grokipedia has some wins, where it still loses, and kind of how it compares to Wikipedia, and what are the general problems of having encyclopedias like this. So let me just reshuffle here a little bit. So for instance, Gamergate. Gamergate has been a big thing 2014, 2015, but actually started, I would say, a little earlier, like maybe 2012 even. I don't like the article about Gamergate by Wikipedia because it entirely disregards the perspective of gamers, because gamers already in 2010s, early 2010s and mid 2010s have not been properly represented by the gaming press. And that is kind of highlighted, or rather showcased here in this article. It only really considers perspectives, like positive perspectives from media outlets. And therefore, it's unsurprising that Gamergate would be considered a loosely organized misogynistic online harassment campaign motivated by a right-wing backlash against feminism, diversity, and progressivism in video game culture. If you're taking only kind of mainstream sources, if you're taking only media outlets and journalistic sources, you are, I'm sorry to say this, but you are bound to reach this kind of conclusion, right? Because that was the perspective they shared. But unfortunately with Gamergate, there is a bit of a catch. There was I would say partially founded, because there was some evidence for this that the gamers managed to collect. There was some suggestion, fairly credible, I would even say, that there's been collusion between some parties and the gaming press that was undisclosed. Again, there is evidence, there are testimonies of this. And also there's been collusion between the different gaming outlets that supposedly there was a Discord server where they kind of agreed on the common perspective. And for a while you would notice that when it comes to some games, for instance, there seems to be like a very strong agreement between what the journalists say, what the press says. And even if when it comes to games, it very often escapes to mainstream media like The Guardian, which has nothing to do with games, The New York Times, which has nothing to do with games. You would see these like gaming topics escaping the gaming sphere and entering even like mainstream media. But basically, there's been an agreement when it comes to certain topics. Like one of the major recent ones, I would say, was Stellar Blade, and how Stellar Blade is incredibly misogynistic and portraying women as objects and dolls. And then I think later there was also Dragon Age the Veilguard, which received, critical acclaim from outlets even like the New York Times, I think. And then the gamers played the game and they noticed that the writing is horrible, the gameplay is very messy and very Dragon Age. It has a lot of weird elements the gamers really didn't like. It was not a 9 out of 10 game. However, there was a very strong agreement among the gaming outlets how they should promote Dragon Age the Veilguard as this like superior RPG experience. So you will notice kind of like empirically some of these little things here and there happening. Sorry for the tangent actually. But here's the article from Grokipedia version 01 so far. Gamergate was a grassroots online movement that emerged in August 2014, primarily focused on exposing conflicts of interest and lack of transparency in video game journalism. And this is a perspective that has been shared outside of the gaming press, and that is basically what Grokipedia here also tries to include. So we have a consideration from what the media themselves say, and also for like non-media pundits do talk about the topic. And it's kind of what I really like about Grokipedia. First of all, it does automatically include the sources. That is a great thing. Secondly, it is incredibly neutral. The language it uses, it's very unemotional, and it kind of tries to, as much as an AI model can, obviously, but it tries to stick to, I would personally say, factual information. It's not 100% correct. I'm just gonna say this here straight away. Not everything, and there are some articles that, sound a little fishy here. But in general, some of these like very heated topics that have been mishandled in the past are being considered a little better, I think. And for gamers, obviously, Gamergate is very important. Me as a gamer as well, unsurprisingly here. What else? Let me just. Oh yeah, Yasuke, for instance, as well. And I'm gonna move on to one of the. Let me just see where some of the other things are worth mentioning. Yeah, so one of the other things here, I'm gonna mention the Yasuke article. Have I been following very closely? Not so much. I mean, I've been seeing it on social media. I haven't been following the Wikipedia side of it, but I kind of, skimmed through kind of the latest stage of it and where we are here. I do notice when it comes to Yasuke that he was being called a samurai, right? African origin, samurai of African origin, no. And there are sources that supposedly call him a samurai, but that part is very broadly disputed, okay? And so the interesting thing about Wikipedia here is that notice it says he was a samurai, and there is a reference to the samurai article. Now, the problem with samurai as a word in English is that it kind of encompasses different meanings, because samurai can be both a warrior with a stipend and sometimes house, who is being hired by a daimyo, for instance, and is fighting for them. So that's one samurai kind of. But there's also the samurai class, okay? And that is basically hereditary class of people. It's basically nobility. There's been several samurai families in Japan who do hold the rank per nobility of being samurai, and that rank can be bestowed by continuing the bloodline, and also by having people marry into the samurai family. There have been cases, quite interesting ones, quite very unusual ones, like Hideyoshi Toyotomi, for instance, who married into a samurai family, thus becoming an actual hereditary samurai. I think there's been also the guy, the character from the Shogun TV series. I can't remember the name right now. He was a sailor, and he was bestowed that title. Unfortunately, with Yasuke, that kind of is a little unclear, and the fact that they're just like, the Wikipedia is kind of blankly stating samurai because that's what the sources say. It doesn't really help anyone in reality, because if the definition of samurai that you are using is unambiguous, then you're not going this one extra layer to explain what is being meant here. And so here comes, for instance, Grokipedia. That is a JPEG, so I can't really highlight anything here. But what I want to read up here is that the second from the last paragraph from the bottom. While primary evidence from Jesuit letters by Louis Foix, Foix, and the diary of Matsudaira Ietada confirms Yasuke's favorite status in arming. That is true. Historians debate whether this constituted formal samurai rank. They don't actually debate, they simply call him a samurai very often, which is not very helpful, as I said. And also, a lot of the historians, they seem to be making this kind of like weird claim that he was given the title when he was not actually given any title. There is very little written about him. He was given items, and you can infer that by him receiving, a sword, a stipend in some form, and so what did he also get? A private residence. This is also debatable. Could have also been just a shack. But basically, he received some housing. He received a sword, unclear what kind of sword, and he also received money, of course. That this could be equivalent to being given the samurai status back then in the Sengoku Jidai period. But again, that is a judgment call that historians make. It's not directly stated anywhere. And also, I didn't mention, so here, for instance, Grokipedia states that historians debate whether this constituted formal samurai rank, and it explains what it means for the purpose of this article: a hereditary warrior class in feudal Japan. That critical piece of information is actually missing from the Wikipedia article, because Wikipedia by itself, it can't really make this kind of judgment, right? It can only reference the meaning of the word, and even in this context, it's not entirely accurate because the word itself means several different things. Now, in Japanese, for instance, there are different words, which are sometimes also used interchangeably, but there is samurai, for instance. It used to mean like the serving warrior, so one belonging to an actual family. And if someone was just a warrior, that was bushi. And there are different types of bushi, of course. They are allowed to carry different weapons. They are allowed to be hired. They might also become ronin afterwards. But that is, being a samurai and being a bushi is something totally different. Okay, sorry for the tangent, but I kind of just wanted to add some context here. And also to highlight, I kind of pulled this one thing here. This is about the, what's it called? The Great Replacement Theory, which there's one article on Wikipedia that is called the Conspiracy Theory. There's some context to be had here, I think. But the general problem with Wikipedia here again is that someone asks, like, why is the theory considered debunked? So why is it considered debunked? Because all of the sources that were being collected for the purpose of the article call it a debunked theory. The article itself makes absolutely no value judgment whatsoever, which is something that is strictly forbidden from what I've been told, kind of, and from what I learned myself on Wikipedia. You're only supposed to report what the sources say. So if you have 5 sources that say this replacement theory, great replacement theory, is debunked, that is what they report. It's a debunked theory because that's what the sources say. And here in this discussion, you see someone bring up, for instance, WP not forum as a rule of, like, it's not a place to be discussing these things, And Wikipedia is also not a place for academic research, because here you would kind of need to do academic research. You would need to go into you would need to go a little deeper to understand, like, is it really a conspiracy theory or is it not, right? If you are instantly saying it is a conspiracy theory based on potentially biased sources, you end up with a biased article. And that is, I think, where Wikipedia itself, not Wikipedia, Grokipedia, where it potentially could be winning a little bit, where it is going to be considering more sources by definition, and therefore kind of broadening the bias and removing it, therefore. Because at some point you need to make this kind of value judgment. You cannot simply be reporting word for word simply because the sources say so. And the other thing which the Yaska article specifically suffered from, but a lot of the other articles as well, is that you would very often have cases of circular reporting on Wikipedia. It is a big nightmare from what I've seen. What is circular reporting? So basically you have, let's say, 1-2 historical sources. In the case of Yaska, it's very interesting because there's only like a handful of like 5 or something sources, and you have only a handful of these sources, and then you have several historical secondary sources written by professors, written by people with an education in history, who are making value judgment based on their expertise. Okay, so that's secondary sources. And then you end up also having what they still consider secondary sources, but end up being tertiary sources, which is basically, newspaper articles and sources like New York Times or The Guardian, for instance, that have absolutely no way of making a value judgment, but nevertheless are making a value judgment on topic of Yaska. And these sources are also being considered within the article, or to make a decision how Yaska should be considered for the purpose of the article. And then obviously it doesn't make any sense, because if you have, let's say, 1 or 2 historians, here in the case of Yaska, there was only one British historian who really deeply studied Yaska specifically. If you are having like 5 or 6 or 10 news articles that contain an interview or relate what this one historian wrote, you don't actually have 5 or 10 secondary sources. You have 5 or 10 tertiary sources and one secondary source, which is, the historian. And sometimes you also have, since it's circular reporting, sometimes you also have cases where A reports B and then B reports A. Not in this case, but sometimes in other cases you will see this, where you basically have like this cross-referencing within different articles, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, obviously. Or you start digging and then you end up with kind of like a website or like a completely unfounded source that someone made a claim, and the claim sounds reasonable, but there's no sources attached to the claim. So what do? Well, not much you can do, right? So obviously Wikipedia has these kind of problems. If Grokipedia is built a little differently and is able to make some value judgment, or is able to more broadly look at the topic and kind of aggregate different pieces of information, judge them properly, value, kind of balance them out, then Wikipedia would win here. But unfortunately, as we've seen with a lot of AI, including ChatGPT, if you are having like a more niche topic, or a topic that is simply being dominated by one perspective, there's no way an AI model is going to make the correct value judgment, and also a person wouldn't either. Because if you have, let's say, 10 sources that say one thing, and then one source that says something else, and then within these 10 sources like reference each other, for instance, or they refer to like some kind of unfounded statement in the primary source or in a secondary source. If an AI model looks at this, do you think an AI model can infinitely recurse to make like a super high level value judgment and to be able to figure out that these sources reference each other? I'm not entirely convinced that it can. So you're going to see a lot of topics where it's still kind of the bulk of available evidence that are problematic. And of course, since it's version 0.1, I don't think we should be assuming everything is going to be 100% correct. But if there is a chance to remove some of the bias that is in Wikipedia, add some, value judgment light, so to speak, to the articles, and kind of make them a little more unbiased, I would be all for it. But again, do not expect miracles. Yeah, so that's basically it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. There's been a lot of rambling, but I hope it has been at least a little bit informative. And yeah, I'm gonna go back to my usual anime related topics later. Yeah, mata ne!